Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing capital budgeting and the basic decisions about whether managers decide to go after a project or not. Okay, so the basic part that we're looking at here when we talk about a capital budgeting decision is that we have essentially I like to call it a go, no-go decision. Okay. Now, one of those things that we look at, and this is a fundamental component of corporate finance, is that we have to evaluate what our future cash flows of a project are and then determine if it's worth us spending the money right now. Okay. The example that I like to start with is thinking about BMW. Okay. BMW built a manufacturing plant very close to my home in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where they spent over $2 billion about 15 years ago to build this plant. Now, they need to sell a lot of automobiles in order to make sure that that plant is profitable. So when they were going through the basic process about deciding whether they wanted to make the cars or not, they had to go through this basic capital budgeting decision. They had to look at what their future cash flows were going to be and then compare them to what their capital outlay is going to be. Right? And so we use those basic time value of money calculations that we've done thus far. Right? There's really no new math here that we're doing, but we basically look at future cash flows and we relate them back to what it's going to cost us today, and then that's going to tell us if it's going to be a go or if it is a no-go. Okay? So that's what we're looking at today. Two basic methods that we use to determine whether we're going to do a project or not. So the first of which we refer to is, the most common is NPV. Okay? NPV stands for net present value. Okay? So we basically compute all these present values and then we look at the net, right? So the difference between net and gross. So we have the net present value, so that's going to be all our future positive cash flows minus the amount that we're going to have to pay out for this project today. And the second concept that we have is this one known as IRR. IRR stands for internal rate of return. Okay? And the internal rate of return is another process. It's very similar to net present value, except for it's basically what our return is going to be if we set our net present value equal to 0. It's what kind of return do we need to have to generate that basic required return. Okay, so these are the two methods that we're going to be going through, and in the future lectures we're going to be looking at which one of these is going to be better than the other one, because there are some general rules about which one we're going to use. We might want to use NPV a lot, we might want to use IRR, but what the best managers end up doing is that they end up using both together, looking at all of the information that they have, and then coming up with a solution as to what it is specifically that they want to do. Now, please keep in mind that even though we use the BMW example and we are talking about looking at building a $2 billion factory, so these decisions are ones that any business owner should be looking at, right? Is because even if I'm running a store and I want to make an expansion, I want to put a new sign up in the front of my restaurant, right? I want a new sign in the restaurant to attract more people in. I can basically estimate what the additional influx of people is going to be, my positive cash flows, and then I need to compute what the cost of the new sign is, right? And if that value, right, if this NPV is greater than 0, that means it ends up being a go. Okay? So if NPV is positive, it's a go. Okay? And that's basically what the thing we're going to be looking at, and we can evaluate for any project that we want. It doesn't really matter what the size.